Today, I have the privilege of talking to Dr. Jessie Hehmeyer. She is a physician founder of Well Empowered, where she practices data driven, heart centered functional medicine. We have such a great conversation today, and I learned so much from her, not only on potential hidden causes of why people can't lose weight, but just overall your health, because she goes right to the root cause. She takes a natural medicine approach and she marries the heart with the science. And I love today's conversation. Welcome, Dr. Jessie, to the show. Who's the person you're being? Are you satisfied? Welcome to Be the Person, a podcast for the brave and the curious, for people ready to explore their true potential. I'm your host, Annie Randall. Join me and let's get ready to go on this journey together. Welcome to Be the Person podcast. I cannot wait for you to hear from today's guest. When I was looking to interview her, I listened to several of her podcasts, and you are in for such nuggets of gold. Today, I have Dr. Jessie joining us. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Anna. It's a pleasure to be here with you and your community.
Yes. And when I was listening, you have such an impressive list of degrees and certifications. What led you to where you are now?
Well, I like to say straight lines are boring. But really I arrived at doing what I like to call data-driven, heart-centered functional medicine or natural medicine. I arrived at doing this by way of my own health journey, right? For me, over the course of years, I struggled with my digestion, I struggled with my weight, I struggled with adrenal fatigue related issues I now see, right? And as I started to look at how to solve these problems, I quickly came to the conclusion that a more traditional approach, while it has served me at different points in my life, wasn't working for the health challenges and conundrums I was dealing with. So I started to get curious about, okay, what could be some new solutions? What could help me? I'm someone who tends towards constipation. So what could help me become someone who poops like a champ, right? What could help me arrive at a weight where I feel my best and look my best so I could be my best? What could help me figure out this adrenal conundrum? And over again, I found that functional medicine, that data driven natural solutions helped me find my pathway to healing. And as I came to my own healing journey, I really got committed to guide others in their healing journey. So that led me to multiple graduate degrees, to certifications, to all those things, because really my solutions aren't going to be the same as your solutions. Your body is unique and my body is unique. And so the very same symptom or conundrum can have many, many, many different explanations, and usually a combination of explanations. And so getting geared up to do this work really meant that I needed to understand deeply the body and the science behind healing and behind creating change and behind the physiology of it all, of course. So that's how I ended up where I am today doing the work I do.
I love it. And you mentioned a few things. One, I love that you treat each person uniquely. It's not a one size fits all. And then you also mentioned, like, I'm a data person. It's why I fell in love with Orange Theory, is just because of all the data and you could see it. And you also mentioned, like, you're heart centered, like you take the science, you take the data, but you also dive in and look at mindset and kind of what's going on there. Tell me, before we go to the science piece, tell me the mindset piece.
Yeah, I've discovered for myself and in working with others that if our mindset isn't where it needs to be to evolve, to discover barriers and remove barriers, whether they're physiological or in our environment or, just the way we're thinking about things. If our mindset's not there, all of the best information and data in the world is not going to make a difference. Right. And so while we do need and want information and data, it really has to be combined with a new perspective in the area of health, especially if it's an area that you've struggled with for a long time. And so for me, when I partner with people, in addition to getting all of this juicy, actionable information, I guide people in a process I call authoring your vision of vitality for your health and your life. And that really begins the heart centered work, right? I have seen, again, for myself and for others, that we really don't buy what we do, we buy why we do it. And so, what I mean by that is the what. Okay. I need to get 8 hours sleep, hypothetically speaking. I know that was a truth for me, right? I need to make this nutritional shift. I need to make this movement or exercise shift. That's what I would call the what.
Mhm.
Now, sometimes the what comes easily and sometimes it doesn't. That's just life, right? We're all humans. We all have the things that come more easily for us and the things that are more challenging. And it's in those things that are more challenging that we really need to be tapped into our why if we're going to make progress and sustain it over time.
Mhm.
Most of us can white knuckle change for, you know, a couple of weeks or a month or something like that. That's why there's the whole 30, right? Because people can white knuckle things for 30 days, especially if they're doing it in a group together, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, we're not playing for term change. We're playing for long term sustainable outcomes.
Mhm.
So when people author their vision of vitality, they really get deeply connected to what they envision as thriving for themselves, like in their real life day to day experience. And then also what that means about how they experience themselves and what they're able to contribute to the world. Really. And to me, our health is the foundation for all of that. Our health is the foundation that allows us to experience self love, that allows us to show up as our best self for ourselves and for others. And then, the fruits of that are just, immeasurable.
Yeah. I think that's so good and so right on of just, yes, we can white knuckle it for a while, but if you don't connect to their why, we see this on my side more on the exercise. Like they'll do it for a minute, but then they quit. And so, but if you can connect those two, it is such a powerful force because then you're right, we're making long term change. And that's really what we're concerned about. Like, no one cares for a month what you do. Like, we want to look at your whole life. What are you going to do?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. I care way more about what you're doing in 3 years than what you're doing in even 3 months.
Yeah. So tell me when people come in, I know a lot of times, they're looking maybe for they're struggling for weight loss, or they could be a variety of different reasons, I assume. But what are some things you really look at if we switch more to the data side and some things that you really focus in on when you look to them?
Yeah, well, so taking, weight loss, as an example, we're looking to uncover the root causes of slow metabolism or struggles in losing weight. And so, that we're going to achieve that in a few different ways. Firstly, when it comes to the data part, I'm going to be measuring commonly overlooked causes of a slow metabolism.
Mhm.
And I know a lot of the people who I work with, it's so funny. I think it's hilarious. Yeah, I'm like, people will come to me and they're like, please let it be my thyroid. Please let it be my thyroid. It's like, right? I think it's very funny because I think people, naturally people think, well, if it's my thyroid, there's an easy solution and then I get the outcome, right? Which is understandable. Like I get it. When you're struggling with your weight for years or decades, it's like, oh my gosh, just come on, give me an answer. That's why we have so many people turning to things like, GLP-1s and, all these new weight loss drugs, because I understand people are at their wits' end. They're over struggling with this area of their life. But there are reasons that are commonly overlooked that are at the source of a slow metabolism. And I will say, it's not often the thyroid. It's a funny thing, right? So the thyroid definitely needs to be optimized for weight loss to occur. And, there are definitely times where through our assessment, because I am going to do a very thorough assessment of the thyroid when I'm working with, people who are struggling with their weight. But even when we uncover the need for thyroid support, very rarely is it just your thyroid? So I'm going to put that aside and say that doesn't count as an overlooked reason. So the overlooked reasons that we really dig into from a data perspective, one is elevated inflammation, right? So elevated inflammation, sometimes people will come to me and say, I feel inflamed. And I'll say, tell me, how's it showing up in your body? And they'll say, well, I'm bloated, or my skin is itchy, or my joints hurt, or, like they'll have different ways they're feeling inflamed. And the thing is, Anne, is mostly people don't feel inflamed. In other words, inflammation is more often than not, silent. It's not showing up as any obvious symptoms, I would say. It's showing up as symptoms, but not as ones people would connect. And one of the most common symptom of elevated inflammation is difficulty losing weight. I see this over and over and over again. And so we can measure inflammation. We don't have to guess. We can measure. There are a lot of different ways we can measure inflammation, but the two most common measurements I use, the data points I use most commonly, are HSCRP. HSCRP, that fancy whole word is high sensitivity C reactive protein. But that HSCRP is a real powerful message sent by your liver to the rest of your body that there's a problem, and immune system, you need to come to the rescue. And therein begins the inflammatory cycle. So this HSCRP is like a conductor of inflammation. It really is a powerful number to know and manage over time. I want to see that at least under 1.5. Sometimes I want to see it under 1, but at least under 1.5. And so when I meet with someone and we decide that this is an important number we need to know, which it is for most people, and it comes back and it's over 2, it's over 3, it's over 4, 5, 6. I am like, I feel like I want to do cartwheels when I see that, because we've just discovered something they didn't know. Like, this is a reason why your metabolism is slow. This is a reason why the scale isn't budging. And what's so interesting is when we get to work and begin knocking out, breaking the vicious cycle of inflammation, it's like we'll suddenly see it show up on the scale. Like, the scale won't move, the scale won't move, the scale won't move. And then all of a sudden, the scale starts to move. Now, we always circle back when someone does have high inflammation. We always circle back and test it again to make sure it's moving the amount that we want, and get strategic if it's not, right? But it's really interesting to me that over and over again, it's very predictable that, it takes a second to break that cycle of inflammation. But when we start to get at it, and that, feedback loop starts to be disrupted in the body, it very naturally starts to show up on the scale. So that is one of the big common causes of a slow metabolism. Another common cause is a compromised insulin sensitivity, or what we might call suboptimal insulin sensitivity. And this is tested via fasting insulin. Now, the thing about that fasting insulin, Anne, is that insulin can be called lab normal at 18, 20, 22. So, if someone just looks at their lab results, they're going to say, oh, 13, my insulin's normal, not the problem. But that's definitely not true. Suboptimal insulin sensitivity begins when your fasting insulin's above 7. That's a huge difference.
Yeah.
So when I see insulin up at 8 or 9, I'm like, okay, the alarms are starting to go off. right? And this becomes a great point of leverage. And again, we're going to get in there. We're going to make shifts. We're going to bring in nutritional shifts that are targeted. We're going to bring in supplements that are targeted. We're going to look for lifestyle opportunities to impact that, right? And again, we're going to get to work and we're going to remeasure in the future to make sure it's shifting. So, those are two common causes. A third cause that we look at in the way of data are nutrient insufficiencies or deficiencies. And
Mhm.
this can show up there are a lot of different nutrients that play a role in our metabolism, but some of the key winners are things like omega-3 fatty acids and vitamin B12, folate, zinc. These all play a role in unique ways. Vitamin D, and these again, these are knowable numbers. The reason I'm so data driven is we don't want to throw darts. Like I said out of the gate, the reason one person has a slow metabolism absolutely is likely going to be different from the reason someone else has a slow metabolism. So the more we can get this information and act on it, the more we can be effective in the way we're proceeding.
Yeah. Such good information. I have a lot of questions for you now.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't have put inflammation and weight loss together or weight loss resistance. Tell me how those two work together.
Yeah, I think this is so fascinating. In fact, I wrote my master's thesis on this very topic because, yes, it is incredible. So, inflammation, we want to first step back and think about what inflammation is designed for, right? There is a survival reason for inflammation, right? Like inflammation has a biological purpose. And we are supposed to produce an inflammatory response if we're injured or sick. It is part of the healing. So, what the real problem is chronically elevated inflammation, not short term inflammation, right? If someone is sick or if they're injured, we expect inflammation to be elevated. In fact, when I work with people, I let them know, listen, if you have a household full of kids and one of them comes home with a bug and you're starting to catch it, don't do your labs then. Wait until that's gone. Give it 2 weeks to clear because we want a fresh read on those numbers. We don't want an artificially spiked inflammatory marker. But to say a little bit more about, okay, great, but why is inflammation connected to a slow metabolism? If you think about how it was for our ancestors hundreds and thousands of years ago, if they were injured or they were sick, they were at risk of starvation. Right, you're out in the forest foraging, you get injured.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, your body better do a good job of holding on to its calories until you are healed and have the ability to go find more food, right? Whether that's infection or whether that's a physical injury. So that inflammatory response, slowing down your metabolism, is really genius, right? Our body is very much geared towards survival. So, it hasn't caught up yet. It doesn't know that we have, Starbucks on every corner and a grocery store around the bend and all the things that we are fortunate to have. But our genes aren't yet. It's going to take a lot of time before they are prepared to deal with our current environment.
I love that. Yeah, such a good way that, again, I would not have thought of it that way. If somebody's listening and they think, oh, I may have high inflammation, what's one tactical thing they could potentially do to lower that?
Yeah, oh my gosh, that is a great question. It's like, ugh, I just want to spew. I want to give all the tips, right? Yeah. But one thing I will give a few different tips because different people will be struggling with different things. Not everybody struggles with one thing. So I'll give a few different common things I see. One is being mindful of the amount of toxins you're bringing into your body, right? And by toxins, I mean alcohol, I mean recreational marijuana.
Mhm.
Um, of course, we could look at personal care product and cleaning products and things like that. But let's just start with like putting in your mouth toxins, right? So starting with alcohol or any kind of recreational drugs. the thing to do, what I would encourage any one of your listeners who go ding ding ding, that's an opportunity for me, right? In the inflammatory world. What I would encourage you to start with is to start by actually just getting present to your truth. And by that I mean starting to track, how many drinks am I having a day? How many drinks am I having a week? How often am I turning to recreational marijuana? Whatever it is, right? Actually just tracking it. And this is for you with you. You do not need to share this with anyone. This is your sacred health journey. And when you start to look at this and start to get present to what your facts are, for some people it can be, oftentimes I'll work with people and they'll say, I just didn't realize, I thought I was having 1, 2 drinks a night, and really, if I'm honest with myself, it's more like 3 or 4, and over the course of weeks and months, like, that's a big difference, right? So starting with that and beginning the journey of playing a better game, right? Playing a better game. So if alcohol or recreational marijuana is your thing, like, okay, can you pull it back? Maybe you decide it's easier for me. Some people will say, listen, it's easier for me just to X out a couple of days a week than it is to reduce my amount each time I sit down for a drink, for example, right? So they might say, I'm going to start with Monday and Wednesday. Monday and Wednesday, no alcohol for me. Okay, great. And then someone else might say, you know what? I can't imagine not having a drink at the end of the day, but I'll start by creating a new alcohol ceiling, and they'll work with it that way. So one of the things I'm really pointing to is I'm inviting you to tap into your wisdom and look at, what do I think would be the way I move forward, the way I play a better game, right? So there's the whole, alcohol world. Other places we can look in the way of sources of elevated inflammation, um, would be around, sugar and simple carbs. Sugar and simple carbs are definitely going to fuel inflammation in a variety of ways. One is, if you're eating a lot of sugar and simple carbs, it's at the cost of nutrient dense anti inflammatory foods, right? You're eating this and not that. So that's one thing. The other thing is, those simple carbs and sugars, they're going to feed a microbiome that's going to be pro-inflammatory, right? It's going to be imbalanced. The bacteria that are present are going to be problematic. So that's another way that, how we're fueling ourselves can lead to elevated inflammation. A third thing that I would point to is simply making sure you're getting enough sleep, right? Our sleep, when we sleep, our body engages in a level of healing that we can't get in any other way. Our brain takes out the trash when we heal. Our immune cells are like little Pac-Mans moving around our body, seeking and destroying unwanted invaders, right? It's a time of cleanup and resolution. So, working towards playing a better game and sleep. And again, just like I was talking about with alcohol, you might start by actually just getting honest with yourself about how much sleep you're having, right? Sometimes people are like, yeah, no, 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 I get 7 hours, and they start to look at it and they're like, oh, maybe it's more like 6, or maybe it's more like 5.5, 3 days, and 6.5, 4 days, whatever it may be. And for most people, kind of a bare minimum of 7 is a good place to strive. If this is a challenge for you, maybe, most people it's going to be ideally 8, but if you're at 7, that's going to be at least a really good place to start if this is an area of struggle for you.
Wow, those are all so good and so good to think about, because you're right. Each person is going to have probably a different struggle. And I appreciate you saying play a better game instead of we have to be perfect. Like, how can we just get better?
Yeah. Yeah. To me, I'm such a champion of this approach. I know for myself, um, I've tried really hard to be perfect. So
Right.
far, I have not been successful. Right. And so, in the own conversations I have with myself about, like, okay, what's a better game? For me, that's really been helpful for evolving. And the people who I partner with, it's like, yeah, that's really the access to freedom is 2 cookies instead of 5. This all or nothing broken inherited paradigm. I haven't really seen it work well for anyone, right? It's really deprivation or overindulgence over and over again, swinging back and forth. And if we can begin to dismantle that approach, throw it in the trash and step into a whole new world that I like to call authoring our middle ground. Authoring your middle ground simply begins with playing a better game and being in that journey, over and over again, playing a better game, one step at a time.
So good. Have you been confused about what to eat, when to eat, and overall the best things to do for your health? I've created a free guide for optimal health just for you. It'll help you live healthier, make more confident choices, and know exactly which choices you should make on food, timing of your food, and so much more. You're not going to want to miss this guide. The link to get the free guide is in the show notes. I have a few questions too on the insulin because I really appreciate that you test this. Like I think some people might wonder why, but a lot of people really kind of new craze is to wear a glucose monitor, which I think can be great. It can be such a good learning tool. I know that I did it. I learned a ton about food and my body, but insulin is a blood test, correct? And tell
Yes.
me like why you would do that versus glucose.
Well, I don't think of it as an either or, right? So a few things. One is I get fasting glucose, I get fasting insulin, I get hemoglobin A1C. These are all in the same world because sometimes one of those will be a red flag, but not the others. And so getting them all together is super helpful. But that, compromised insulin sensitivity is often the canary in the coal mine before fasting glucose or globin A1C are out of whack. So I'll bring them all together. And then in the way of bringing in something like a continuous glucose monitor, I'm with you, Anne. I see them useful if they're used on top of a foundation of education, right? If we start, so I've worked with people who are like, yeah, I've used a CGM, I've used a continuous glucose monitor. I don't really know what to do with it, right? It can be, it's just, it doesn't become, if you're not coming to it with a foundational understanding of what you're seeing and also what to do about it, I don't think they're useful in those situations. So when I work with people, if we do bring in a continuous glucose monitor, it's usually after anywhere from a month and a half to 2 months of working together. So people kind of get a lay of the land of their body, the shifts that are going to make a difference for them, starting to engage in that work, and then we might bring in a continuous glucose monitor so that they can get real time feedback, right? Like you were saying, the insights people get are just, it's so fun, right? Because, one of the things, and I'm sure you've seen this too, Ian, we talk about sugars and simple carbs, right? Like an example of the sugar would be, like the 5 cookies, an example of the simple carbs, a cup and a half of white rice, right? Something like that, right? The thing is those things, the 5 cookies and the cup and a half of white rice, they have the same impact on your blood sugar as, they both impact your blood sugar the same way is what I'm trying to say. And it's hard to believe, right? Even deeply knowing this work, there's still like something in the back of my brain that is like, really, white rice and 5 cookies? But the truth is, yes, they do have the same impact. And so when you're wearing a continuous glucose monitor, that truth is unavoidable, right? You see it happening in your body. It's so, the number of people I've worked with who have come back to, an appointment wearing a CGM and are like, can you believe it? After I ate those potatoes, what happened to my blood sugar? I'm like, yeah, I can believe it.
Right.
Right. I really can.
Yes, it is interesting because, yeah, you just think it will be different. Um, so how would insulin, would you say that's like a precursor to higher glucose then? Is it a precursor
Yes.
maybe?
Yes, 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 exactly. Right. So to talk about what insulin is a hormone, and any hormone is a communicator, right? A hormone's purpose is to communicate to your body. So what does insulin communicate? Well, to tell the story of insulin, communicates a lot of different things, but one important thing that it communicates is first of all, when we eat carbohydrates, our pancreas produces insulin because insulin acts as an escort to those carbohydrates. Insulin walks up to those carbohydrates, grabs that carb by its sticky little hand, walks it over to a cell, and it knocks on the cell wall. That's the communication it begins. It knocks on the cell wall. The cell wall then opens up and welcomes that glucose in. Now, the thing is, for a variety of reasons, if we just take the example of, if we're consuming more and more carbohydrates, we're going to produce more and more insulin. And those cells, they're going to get that message of insulin knocking on their little cell doors over and over and over again. And cells end up acting a little bit like you and I would if someone started ringing our doorbell and just kept ringing it for 3 days straight, right? If I came over to your house, Anne, and started ringing your doorbell and kept ringing it for 3 days straight, at a certain point, you wouldn't even hear it,
Yeah.
right? And that's how cells act, right? The insulin's knocking on the door, knocking on the door. And then it's such like a perpetual knock that cells stop to hear the message. And so more insulin's produced, more insulin's produced. And this is what we call insulin resistance. Cells are resistant to the message of insulin because it's just, kind of overwhelmed basically. But that is ultimately, insulin begins to rise. And then over time, because the cells aren't opening up their doors, they can no longer welcome in any more glucose. They're full, basically. Um, your blood glucose is going to rise.
Okay. Such a good analogy. Like I'm a picture person, so I'm picturing all of that. That's
Yes.
helping.
Right.
Yeah. So what if somebody came in and let's say they have a 13 for an insulin marker and a blood test?
Mhm.
What would be some steps maybe you would take them through?
Well, we're going to do a deep dive into nutrition. And by deep dive, I mean that when I work with people, I actually have them track their life off of a shared document. So they track their nutrition, their sleep, their movement, their digestion, any other symptoms they're dealing with. That's all off of a shared document. But we're also going to use some targeted supplementation, right? So elevated insulin. And of course, guys, please don't do it yourself sort of situation. You want to make sure you're using these supplements appropriately. So work with a qualified healthcare provider to make sure they're right for you. But we are going to use some great supplements for that, 13 insulin to bring it down. A few things that I love. One is berberine. And berberine, we want to make sure we use it at a dose that's going to get the job done. And, for someone with an insulin of 13, I'm going to be pulling in 500 milligrams of berberine 3 times a day. So 500 milligrams of berberine 3 times a day. I will I suspect in that person we're dealing with some nutrient deficiencies, but I'm not going to guess. We're going to test and we're going to be very targeted in that. Vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acids in that situation, those are two of the kind of ring ones that come to mind. Um, Also in the supplement world, I would likely be bringing in Akkermansia. So Akkermansia is a new kid on the block in the probiotic world. And Akkermansia has been shown to have some really fabulous benefits as it pertains to metabolic health. And by that, I mean diabetes and heart health in particular. So, elevated insulin, fasting insulin of 13, I'll probably bring in that Akkermansia along with the berberine, along with targeted nutritional shifts and lifestyle shifts. Um, and it's been amazing. Like I wouldn't have believed that Akkermansia, this, good bacteria would move the needle the way I see it moving the needle. Again, combined with other things, but I really see it having a synergistic impact in a fabulous and really measurable way. So
Yeah.
those are some of the things that I'd begin to look at. And of course, we have the whole world of movement, right? Just little things like, okay, can we get you moving can you walk for 10 minutes after you eat? Just, really supporting that insulin sensitivity in that way.
Yeah. It's amazing what that does. When I wore that monitor, that was one of the things. I know it's a little different because it's glucose versus insulin, but what a difference it is like in our habit now. My husband and I, no matter what, we walk around the block after dinner.
I love it. That's awesome. Yeah. Hmm.
You mentioned acromantia. Is that something, do you have to supplement with it or is that something you can get in foods?
If you're dealing with someone if someone has a fasting insulin of 13 or higher, you have to supplement with it. So there are a few different. I don't have any relationship with any of these supplement companies, but there's one company called Pendulum that played a really big role in bringing acromantia, like putting the spotlight on acromantia. They have some nice acromantia products. There's another company, Metagenics. I really like their acromantia because they pair it with the active anti-inflammatory ingredient in green tea, which is called EGCG. So there's really
Mhm.
nice synergy there. But those you would need to supplement with it. And and those are just two different companies that have some really good acromantia products.
Okay. Love that. Thank you. I
Yeah.
think those are super helpful because, again, when you think of weight loss, a lot of people think of calories, food restriction, just all the different things, but you don't necessarily go to inflammation, insulin, and different labs for deficiencies. So I love that approach. It's just very different than from what I think we hear day to day.
Yeah, well, and it really just simply put works. And the calories in versus calories out, right? Yes, it's true that calories matter, and it's definitely not the whole story, right? There's a lot more to how nutrition impacts our body than just simply calories in versus calories out.
Yeah. Tell me, you mentioned movement, but I know you have a background in fitness as well. And that's one of the reasons I loved Orange Theory is just because it has both cardio and strength training, which I think one from a weight loss and two an aging perspective makes such a huge difference. What do you see typically in your practice with your patients?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, to me, I am so with you, Anne. Like I love movement. And it's a funny thing, as you said, movement has been a big part of my life for decades and I mean forever, really. And it's hard it's like so much of what I get out of movement is spiritual nourishment, and then of course there's all the physical benefits we get from it. But in my practice, one of the biggest things I see people foregoing is strength training. And for someone who's not moving, right? Everybody falls into a different category. The first thing I'm going to encourage is movement of any kind, right? Start where you are. If walking seems like something you could begin, great, let's start there. But over time, I'm going to continue to guide people in moving their edge. And I more often than not will see people who are handling the cardio, but aren't yet handling meaningful strength training, right? Meaning they're not doing strength training at all, or they're lifting like 2-pound dumbbells. And it's like, you're going to need to do something a little bit more than that, right? So strength training is something overall that I see as a big point of leverage for people around their health, around their longevity, around weight, right? We know that in our 30s, we begin losing muscle, right? There's an actual fancy medical term for it called sarcopenia, right? We begin losing muscle in our 30s unless we are diligently reminding our body it's got to hold on to that muscle. And, just like we were talking about inflammation and why that would be connected to a slow metabolism from a survival perspective, the same is true about there's a connection between why our body would let go of muscle from a survival perspective. And the reason is muscle is metabolically expensive. It needs a lot of calories to be maintained. And that's good news for us in the way of like maintaining a weight that has us feel our best and is most supportive of our health. But that means that we need to send our body a message to hold on to that muscle, right? And to say a little bit more about that letting go of muscle because it's metabolically expensive. Again, our body doesn't know that we are lucky enough to live in a time of abundance of food, right? And so our body is engineered to let go of anything that would put it at risk from a survival perspective, like immediate survival. And something that costs a lot of calories, like muscle, if your body can offload it, it will. So you need to give it the message, no, 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 you have to hold on to this, right? The strength training is the message you're giving to your body to hold on to this muscle or perish, really is the message we're sharing, when we're doing strength training. So it's really, really important we do that. Again, there's so much research around muscle mass and longevity, muscle mass and you know, uh just overall health and our weight and insulin sensitivity and bone health and falls over time. So strength training is definitely one of those things that I see people foregoing that we move towards like, okay, let's bring this into your life.
Yeah. I think it's so important. And anytime somebody new comes into the studio or even our members, I just am so excited they're there because I know it's going to impact how they age. One, from just a longevity standpoint of you're right, that is so key to one, burning calories, but two, just aging well and being able to do the movement that you want to do. It's kind of like that big why. It's such a key factor in that,
Yeah,
that people don't necessarily think about on the front side when they're thinking lifting weights at the gym.
totally, totally. And again, just going back to like my own experience in strength training and moving my body, to me, it's like it becomes this it's like a playground for evolution, right? When you're doing something challenging, whether it's strength training or something cardiovascular, you begin to learn how to work with yourself through challenges in a unique way. It's kind of like your very own like research lab on yourself. Like, how do I be with myself when it gets challenging? Right. And then you can take those learnings and bring it to other areas of your life as well.
Oh my gosh, so true. Every year, I love to put out a physical challenge to myself just because of what it does mentally. I mean, yes, there are physical gains, there's no doubt, but there is more mental gains to figure out how do I push through something hard because you're going to see it physically, but like in the business world, it makes me a lot stronger too.
Love it. Love it. I'd be so curious about what some of the physical challenges are that you've taken on.
Yeah, there have been some fun ones. Like, my first one ever was like running a marathon. That's a lot of
Awesome.
people.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to do that, triathlons. I did a hike in the Appalachian Trail.
Yes. Love it.
And this year, like it's September or no, it's October when we're recording this, I'm a month behind. And for next summer, it's to be able to do a triathlon, which I've done lots of triathlons before, but I
Mhm.
had my labrum and my hip replaced
Mhm.
2.5 years ago.
Mhm.
And so my body just hasn't cooperated really with with overall training. But I believe that if you stay curious long enough, like you will figure out your body and it will happen. So triathlon next year is my push goal.
I love that. That is it's so well said, Anne. If you stay curious with your body,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
the
it brings back
answers will
today.
appear. Yeah, that's great. Fabulous.
So to our listeners out there, maybe you want to think, what is your push physical goal that you could do? And again, it shouldn't be something you can do today or it wouldn't be a push.
Yeah, that's great.
I think this is such great information. And I didn't prep you for this question, but I think you'll be able to know it off the top of your head. Like, I love to end with books that people love and change their life or their mind about things. So maybe one or two books that are your very favorites.
Oh, yes. Okay. Well, I'm going to have to talk about payment children.
Okay.
So payment children is who I would turn to. So just to say a bit about payment children, I'm sure some of you listeners already know who she is, but she is the first American born Buddhist nun. And she came to Buddhism after two divorces. And she was like, oh my God, there's something I need to figure out. Right. Anyway, long story short, she is a super relatable, humorous, incredibly compassionate human being. And she has loads of books out there. But one book, I'll just name a few. And really, what I'd encourage you to do is, if you're curious, go to Amazon, look her name up, Pemachudron, and grab whatever book speaks to you because you'll grab the right one. But a few that I really would highlight. One is The Wisdom of No Escape.
Okay.
Another one is When Things Fall Apart. Another one is Living Beautifully. But really, again, you can't go wrong. And these are books that I think of as like books you sip,
Yeah.
right? Like there are books you kind of like devour, so to speak, right? And then there are
Right.
books you sip. These are sipping books, right? Read a paragraph or two. You'll know when it's time to set it down. But the point is to take it in slowly and really like marinate in the wisdom and look at, what's useful for you and what you pull out of it.
Yeah. I have not heard of her. So that's why I love to ask the question because I learn something new every time. And I'll definitely link to that in the show notes.
That's great.
Awesome. Well, I know people, I have learned a lot from you. So I appreciate you so much. And I know people are going to want to connect with you. What's the best way for them to do that?
Sure. Yeah, you can find me on social media at Well Empowered, and you can find me on my website, Well Empowered, and that's WELLEMPOWERED.com. And at Well Empowered, feel free to schedule a complimentary consultation. And, that goes for whether you're interested in exploring working together or you'd really just like to connect and ask me a few questions. Please feel free to use that link. That's what it's for. Also at wellempowered.com/dare, you can register to receive our weekly dare. So every Sunday, we send out a new micro habit that we dare you to take on and to take it on for 1 week and just notice what makes a difference. So, an example of a recent micro habit was for the week ahead, we dared people to give up eating out of bags. In other words, chips or nuts or, like snack, things that you might just like reach into the bag and consume for 1 week. Practice taking the portion you think you're going to enjoy and putting it in a bowl or on a plate and enjoying it. And if you feel like you want to go back and get seconds, that's fine. Just do the same thing. Put it, just don't eat out of the bag. So that's an example of one dare we sent out in these last weeks.
Oh my gosh. I love that. One, I love micro habits. And two, I got these so-called healthy potato chips. I don't know if there's such a thing, but sometimes I'm not a potato chip person, but my husband is.
Mhm.
And so tonight at dinner, he had the bag. And I was like, thinking that same thing, like put them on plate. And you'll know how many you're eating.
That's
The
right.
word, but maybe we just slide him over the microchip.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Totally. That's great.
Love it. Thank you so much for all the wisdom you shared. I really appreciate you and what you're doing out there. I think you will make such a difference to our listeners. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in today. If this resonates with you and you know somebody that could use the information, please share it out with them. And always, it would mean the world to me if you would give us a 5-star review so this can hit and reach more people. Thanks for tuning in today.